Imagine walking into a room and finding a young, deeply traumatized child sitting completely alone in the corner. His eyes are just blank. He absolutely refuses to speak to anyone, not the police, not the doctors, not the psychologists. But his hands won't stop moving. He's frantically, obsessively scribbling this single, chilling phrase over and over again into a notebook, pressing down so hard the pen is literally tearing right through the paper. He's lying, he's lying, he's lying.
Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to this explainer on the Blue Notebook, A Silent Witness. Today, we're looking at a deeply unsettling mystery surrounding the death of a well-known, highly respected physician, Dr. Michael Carter. At exactly 10:18 p.m., the doctor was found dead on the floor of his own drawing room, the victim of a fatal head injury. But as the police arrived and started securing the area, they almost immediately realized that something was incredibly wrong with the picture they were looking at. The facts of this crime scene were just baffling. First off, there was absolutely no sign of forced entry. None. The windows were intact, the locks were completely unpicked, and the cupboards and the safes totally untouched. All the money in the house was perfectly intact, meaning this was absolutely not just some robbery gone wrong. But here is the most chilling detail of all. The evidence showed that Dr. Carter opened the front door himself. So the crucial takeaway here is that the killer wasn't some random intruder lurking in the bushes. No, the killer was almost certainly someone the doctor knew, someone he trusted enough to let into his home late at night. Now there was one major, massive complication in this investigation. At the exact time of the murder, there was only one other person inside that house, Dr. Carter's only son, Ethan. And Ethan was just 9 years old. When the police finally found him, he was huddled in the corner of his room. The sheer trauma of whatever he had experienced that night had completely overwhelmed his little system. He had gone entirely mute, not a single word. He was the sole witness to a brutal crime, trapped in a silence that he just couldn't break. But Ethan did find one way to communicate. He had this little blue notebook. And while everyone around him, investigators, family members, medical professionals, were trying desperately to coax him to talk, Ethan just kept his head down and wrote. He wrote all day long. And what he was writing began to deeply, deeply unsettle every single person who walked into that room. Because you see, he wasn't writing a description of the killer. He wasn't drawing a face or a map. He was just writing this one specific phrase, repeatedly, with such intense, terrifying force that the tip of his pen was literally shredding the pages. He's lying. Over and over and over. It instantly became the central mystery of the entire investigation. Who on earth was he? So the police cast a wide net. They brought in the 6 most likely suspects who had direct connections to Dr. Carter and access to his life. We've got his wife, his business partner, his driver, the household maid, a current patient, and finally, Dr. Carter's younger brother, Richard. The police rigorously interrogated every single one of them. But here was the massive roadblock they hit. Every single person's story corroborated the others perfectly. Their timelines were flawless. There wasn't a single crack in any of their alibis. And yet, back in his room, little Ethan just kept writing it. He's lying. The investigation dragged on for days, yielding absolutely nothing. But then, on the 4th day, a breakthrough. While clearing out a dusty storeroom in the house, someone stumbled upon an old voice recorder. It was covered in dust, sure, but it was still functional. The police gathered around, held their breath, and hit play. At first, they just heard the muffled sounds of a normal, everyday conversation. But then, the clear, unmistakable voice of a child, Ethan, saying just 3 words, "I saw it." And then, abrupt, dead silence. Forensic analysis of that device revealed something totally terrifying. The tape hadn't run out. The battery hadn't died. Someone had deliberately reached out and manually pressed the stop button. The whole investigation immediately pivoted. Someone was in that house, someone stopped that recording, and someone was definitely lying. The entire police force's attention turned right back to Ethan's blue notebook. They desperately needed to know the answer to the most important question in this entire case. Who is he? Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the actual breakthrough came. It was born from the sheer brilliance of one investigator who noticed a bizarre physical detail about Ethan's notebook. Ethan wasn't just writing the phrase, he was pressing down incredibly hard, specifically on the word he. In fact, he was pressing so hard, he was tearing right through the paper. So the investigator carefully removed all those torn pages from the notebook and arranged them completely flat out on the floor. And when he looked at the specific recurring position of the word he across all those different pages, he realized Ethan was mapping out a shape.
The scattered, torn markings didn't just form some random pattern. When you stepped back and looked at them, they formed the distinct, undeniable shape of a walking stick. A cane.
The whole room went dead silent as the realization hit. Out of the 6 suspects they had brought in, only one of them used a cane. Dr. Carter's younger brother, Richard. Ever since an accident years ago that left him with a severe leg issue, Richard relied heavily on a distinct black walking cane. The child wasn't just scribbling, he was pointing directly at his uncle. But the police had a massive problem. Actually, scratch that. It was a gigantic hurdle. Richard's alibi was completely ironclad.
Richard claimed he was all the way across town during the murder, and he had the receipts to prove it. Literally. He had a restaurant bill with a timestamp, and he even had CCTV footage placing him there. But, armed with this new clue from Ethan's notebook, the forensics team went back to work on that old, dusty voice recorder, desperately trying to recover any audio that might have been captured right after the stop button was pressed. And you know what? They did. They pulled a fractured, barely audible few seconds of sound. It was Ethan's tiny voice saying, "Uncle Richard, why did you hurt Dad?" Armed with this newly recovered audio, the police completely tore into Richard's alibi. They discovered he had actually bribed a restaurant employee to change the timestamp on the bill. And that CCTV footage? It was old, recycled footage from weeks prior. His perfect alibi was a total 100% fabrication.
And with that, the truth finally spilled out. The motive was as old as time itself: money and family resentment. You see, Richard had harbored this deep, simmering anger toward his brother over an old dispute regarding their father's property. That night, Richard had come over to talk, but the talk quickly escalated into a fierce argument. The argument turned into a physical struggle, and that struggle ended with a fatal blow. And tragically, little Ethan, standing quietly by the corner of the stairs, had witnessed the entire horrific event unfold.
Ethan had been absolutely terrified. He had tried to record what was happening on that old device. But in the immediate aftermath of the killing, Richard spotted his 9-year-old nephew. He walked over to the boy, knelt down right in front of him, looked him dead in the eyes, and whispered this chilling threat: "You won't tell anyone." And with that, Richard reached out and manually clicked the stop button on the voice recorder. So, the trial concluded. Richard was put behind bars where he belonged. But the trauma of that night, it really lingered. For a long, long time after the gavel fell, Ethan still wouldn't speak. Then, one day, sitting in the quiet of their home, his mother looked at him. She thought about that blue notebook, and she finally asked him the question that had been haunting her from the very beginning. "Ethan, you wrote 'he's lying' from the very first day. Why didn't you just write his name?" Ethan sat in silence for a long time. I mean, the weight of what he had carried as a 9-year-old boy is just unimaginable. Finally, he looked up at his mother, and slowly, softly, he broke his silence. "Because I was scared." What if he read it? Wow. It's just a heartbreaking realization. Ethan wasn't just being cryptic to be difficult, he was terrified. He knew the killer was a family member. He knew Uncle Richard had access to the house. He was terrified that if he explicitly wrote his uncle's name down, Richard would find the notebook, read it, and come back for him. But the story doesn't end in fear. Back on the table, that famous blue notebook still lay open. On the very first page, those frantic, heavy letters still screamed out, "He's lying." But if you turned all the way to the very last page of that notebook, you would see a new addition. A single, simple sentence, written in completely calm, steady handwriting. Not anymore. Man, that just gives me goosebumps. It's an absolutely incredible story of resilience that shows us exactly how the mind protects itself under extreme trauma. And this is exactly why this story matters for all of us. It leaves us with a profound question to consider in our own lives. When you are entirely consumed by fear, and silence feels like your absolute only safe haven, how do you find the courage to hold on to the truth? What would it take for you to finally pick up the pen and write, "Not anymore"?